welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since we've done a video, and honestly I just haven't had a lot of content to make. It's been almost a year since I've done anything with the car, and I really haven't driven it much. The last time you saw me with this car was on my way to 7 Stock 24, which was last year, 2022. And you might have seen my Instagram post where the car made it all the way to 7 Stock fine, but then on the way back home it actually broke down. And what was going on was the car was overheating. At the time I didn't realize it, but what was happening was one of the fuses in the PDM was being tripped because the current for the electric water pump was exceeding the 8 amps that was allotted for that output. So essentially what we're going to be talking about today is electric water pump and all of the issues that I've had with the electric water pump and what we can do to tune it or tweak it to make it even better. It's very flexible. There's a lot you can do, and we're going to be going over how I set it up in the Haltech and some of the issues that I've had along the way. Now, in addition to the overheating issues that I had on the way back from 7 Stock last year, on the way to 7 Stock 25 just a couple of weeks ago, I had the opposite problem. And essentially I had configured the water pump to pump too early and too much. So what was happening was the car was actually running too cold. Now I noticed this initially because it was about 45 degrees ambient temperature when I left my house at around 6 o'clock in the morning to drive up to 7 Stock in Irwindale. And the car was cruising between 175 and 180 degrees. Now we want it closer to 200, and it just never got that hot. And so I wanted to crank the heat up in the car, but it just wasn't working. And so I wasn't getting any heat out of the vents inside the car, and that was my first indication of the car just not running hot enough. And so I went from one extreme to the other, and so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through, I'm going to give you just a really quick tour of all the components in the system and how the electric water pump works, and then we're going to look at the Haltech software and see how it's configured in there and make those changes that I think that it needs to have to be for the engine to run a little bit warmer. And then we're going to show the PDM and actually how you use PWM outputs on a PDM to be able to configure and customize a duty cycle that works with the Haltech ECU, so that you can essentially change the speed of the amount of flow that you get out of the water pump. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, let's talk really quick about the components in the electric water pump setup. So as you can see here, I have the stock thermostat housing right here, and then that routes down into the radiator down here, and then it comes out of the radiator on this side down into the water pump. You can kind of see it down there, down into the depths in here. So that's the electric water pump, and then that pumps up through the bottom of the engine right here. Now, you've probably seen that a lot of people with electric water pump setups have this deleted, and then they've got some type of inlet and outlet coming through the stock water pump housing. I bought the kit from Turblown, which comes with this delete plate right here, and it retains the factory thermostat housing. Now, according to Turblown, that's the way to go, because you can end up running your engine too cold if you get rid of that that thermostat. Now, some of you can comment below if you've seen otherwise, but for me, the main reason I kept this right here is because in order to run your water pump through here, it means that you've got to move the alternator. And typically that goes over on the side down here with a side mount bracket. The problem with that for me is that I wanted to retain the air conditioning. And you can see in there I've got my RX-7 compressor, which isn't set up yet. That will be set up in a later video. But this gets in the way if you want to run your lines through here. So I just decided that I was going to keep the stock setup, and so far I'm pretty happy with it. These are Mishimoto coolant hoses, and I really didn't have to do anything too custom to get that installed in there. So it's a pretty good setup and was easy to install. The water pump itself is not mounted to anything. Davies Craig actually recommends to not solid mount the pump, to just kind of let it hang by the coolant hoses there. So it's just kind of freestanding in there. And with the way that we've set up with the Haltech ECU, there's only 2 wires going to it. So it's a very simple electrical connection there. Okay, we're gonna start in Windows here. I'm in Windows 11. Really doesn't matter if you're on Windows 10, but basically what we're gonna need to do is load up the Haltech NSP software. You may have an older version of ESP. It works basically the same. But, and again, just a kind of a recap, we're using an Elite 2500 ECU for this. I don't have the ECU plugged into the USB connection at the moment, but that's okay, because we're just going to load up a map file that I have from a couple weeks ago. And so we're going to open this up and have a look at what we see. Now, if this doesn't initially pop up for you, I was messing around with this before, so the electric water pump is already up here, but you can find that under engine functions, or you can type it in the search box here, and it will pop up here. So the first thing to notice is that you actually have to enable this with the toggle switch, and this frequency here is for the PWM, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but basically I have this matched up to the frequency that's required by my PDM. If you don't have a PDM and you're going to do this the same way that I'm doing this here, you will need a solid state relay. And essentially, based on whatever that relay requires for the frequency, you're going to have to put it in here. The wiring tab basically allows you to assign whatever output that you want on the ECU. I'm just using the Ignition 7 because that was a free output. And we've got this set to the high for active state. Okay, the most important part here, which controls everything, is going to be the duty cycle. Now you'll see that there's 2 axes. There's the RPM and the coolant temperature, and this is where kind of all the magic happens. everywhere from idle at 175 degrees, I've got it at 0% duty cycle, which means that the water pump is off. And then we've got it maxed out at 90% at the highest temperature. You could go up to 100% on your water pump, but I've got mine set to 90 and I'm happy with that. Now, as I mentioned before, the main problem that I had with the last drive is that the engine was actually running too cold. The way that the stock thermostat works is that it begins to open at 180 degrees, and then at around 200 degrees it's fully opened. So at that point, once this is fully opened, you can start using your your heater for the interior of your car and so forth. Plenty of coolant, hot coolant will be coming through that heater core to heat the cabin and so forth. But where I was at, it was the car was staying around between 175 and 180 degrees at cruising speed, so it was not heating up the cabin when I was trying to use my heat. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate these two columns right here, and I want the water pump to start functioning at 185 degrees. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to right click and go to table axis setup, and we're going to change these values in here. So I'm going to delete 175 and 180, and then I'm going to add 2 in here since we have a maximum of, I think this is 8 values that we can put in here. So I'm going to put in 215 and I'm going to put 220, and that's about the maximum that we want to be running the vehicle at. At 220 degrees, it'll actually limit the RPM to 2000 RPM as a safety feature. So we really don't want to get into this range. And then the RPM will just keep the same. So we'll click OK, and you'll notice now that this is all changed. Now, essentially, we want to shift all of the numbers over to the right. So at 185 degrees and idle, we're gonna have the water pump set at 0% duty cycle, which means that it's off, and then we're gonna start engaging it at around 10% at 1000 RPM, and just kind of go from there. I'm gonna go up in 5% increments on all of this to go in line with the RPM increase. Oops. What am I doing here? Okay. All right. And then we're going to kind of increase this in 10% increments with every 5 degrees. So going from 185 to 190, we're going to go up to 10%, and then 20%, 20%, 30%, 40%. And then when we get up to this above 205 degrees, we're going to increase it significantly. So 75% at 215 degrees and 90% at 220. Actually, we'll keep this even and we'll go 70. So and then we're going to do the same thing as the RPM increases as well. And so I'll go ahead and do that now, and we'll meet back up once that's done. Okay, so we got the table filled out, and then essentially what we're going to do is save this, go to save as, create a new map, and then once I plug this back into the car, we'll load that up and get that onto the ECU and do a test drive. And we'll get the car warmed up, see how it idles, what temperature it idles at, do a few pulls, and we'll just kind of see how it goes. And like I said, there's a good possibility I'll have to tweak this a little bit more, but I think that at this point I'm on the right track. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is the PDM software, and this is basically what I have, which is the Moristech Black Box PDM. This is a 30 output PDM with a combination of 20 amp and 8 amp outputs. At some point in the near future, I'm going to be rewiring this, and at that point we'll kind of go through in detail everything that it takes to wire up a PDM and how it actually functions. But initially, right now, we just want to focus on the electric water pump. So the first thing I want to show you is the switch inputs. This is basically where we're feeding that output from the ECU. And we've got the electric water pump here, and again, we have it match the high state of the ECU output, and we can see that it's all pinned up and ready to go. Now, the other thing that really needs to be configured here is the output. Now, when we go to the output, I've got it on output 15 here, and this is actually one of the things that needs to be fixed when I rewire the PDM. You'll notice, as I mentioned, in the Haltech software, I have everything maxing out at 90%, and that's because at 100%, sometimes this peaks above 8 amps and it will trip the fuse. And I've had this happen a couple of times. It's actually happened at 7 stock last year in 2022. I didn't realize it at the time what was going on, but the protections, the engine protections kicked in because the engine was overheating, and what was happening is that the water pump was actually tripping a fuse and not operating. And that was because this was getting up to about 8.2 amps and tripping. So to solve that for the time being, I limited the output to 90%, and now it never goes above about 7.5 amps. So that's fine for now. But what I do need to do when I rewire this is to take it off this 8 amp pin and put it on one of these 20 amp outputs, and that will allow me to run it at 100%. So we've got the electric water pump output. What we're going to look at here is that this is a specific output that has PWM. So you'll notice that there are specific outputs that operate with PWM, and you can only use these. So we've got two 20 amp outputs, and we've got two 8 amp outputs. And so at the moment we're at the 8 amp PWM output. If you put it on any of these other outputs, it will not pulse, and it will not allow you to change the duty cycle. So that's very important. It does have to be a PWM output, and if you're using a PDM, your PDM needs to have PWM capability built into it. And you'll notice that I also have the thermo fans set up on PWM as well. These are the RX-7 fans. And actually, the way that I have this set up here is I've got each fan on a 20 amp output, but believe it or not, the two fans combined are only pulling about a little over 8 amps. So I'm going to be able to free up one of these to put the electric water pump back up here so that I don't have those issues anymore. Okay, so that's essentially how it's set up. The only other thing that I'll show you on here is, as I mentioned with the ECU setup, the PWM frequency is kind of a set We have the option of doing 94 hertz or 140 hertz. I've got it set to 140 hertz just so that it's a little bit smoother. But again, when you have the Haltech software under the electric water pump, you have to have this frequency match whatever your PDM is. And that's essentially all there is to it. The other nice thing about this PDM, there's a lot of nice things, but you'll be able to see the how many amps your water pump is actually pulling, depending on the model and the make. So you might be able to use an 8 amp output if you got a smaller pump or a different manufacturer or something like that. Mine is the Davies Craig that came in a kit from Turblown. So again, most of the time it operates under 8 amps, but there's some load situations, for whatever reason, it can peak above that, and that's where I'm having that problem. Thanks for watching. I know at 7 Stock this year, several of you came up to me and let me know that you really appreciate the videos that I put out on YouTube and asked me for more. So I'm going to try to do my best as much as I can to make some new videos and some new content. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up, because that helps the algorithm and it helps other people find these videos. One of the things that I was really looking for and why I started making these videos initially was because I couldn't find a lot of this information on YouTube myself, so I started making the videos to help other people. And so if these videos do help you, please let me know. Leave a comment, recommend them to other people, and that will just kind of allow me to keep making more videos.